Good evening, everyone. We're going to give everyone a couple minutes to get connected here, and we're going to start in just a couple minutes. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Have You Lost Your Job or Are You Ready to Leave? Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. So you're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, you can just select the telephone and the audio pane, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to our panel by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. And you may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during this session. This will be an interactive session. There will be poll questions, so participation is encouraged. And with that, please welcome today's panelists, Rich Austreng, Nick Welham, and Jane Evarian. Take it away, Rich.
All right. Well, first off, thank you everyone for joining us. And what we hope to do today is really not just talk about losing a job or leaving a job, but what you can do before, after, and how to manage the process. You know, the Executive MBA Board does a lot of things to try to add value to our alumni. And this is another good example of the people on the board of directors for the Alumni Association for the EMBA trying to give back to our alumni. So it's from alumni to alumni, and then also including the different resources that we all have available to us, such as Jane. Jane comes to us as a university employee who offers different value, and she comes to us with a slightly different perspective. And there's a lot of different ways that we can use the university resources that I'll have to say I was certainly unaware of at many times during my points after graduation, and I think it might be highlighting some good opportunities for you to get further engaged with the resources we all have available to us from Michigan State. And so Jane certainly embodies a good piece of that. So the first thing I'll mention is, you know, why this webinar, what to do before and after, and the format and resources that we're making available. So first off, it's no surprise to anyone that the employment landscape is changing very quickly. This was already happening before COVID really impacted the United States. It was certainly happening over the last 6 months to a year, where a lot of companies were trying to reduce expenses. And a lot of companies will take their first stab at reducing expenses by reducing headcount and eliminating a salary expense. And that's really one of the main reasons for this webinar, because this was happening before. It's going to continue to happen during, and as well as it's going to evolve sharply during the next 3, 6, and 9 month segments. So unemployment is currently at about 15%. Just in the last week or so, 2.1 million more people applied for unemployment. These numbers are kind of overwhelming and staggering, but if you just look at the last 10 weeks, over 40 million new people have entered the unemployment ranks just over the last 10-week sector. And you know, the U.S. unemployment rate is at its highest since the Great Depression. And so how does it impact this webinar? This webinar is basically addressing the fact that it can happen to you, it may happen to you, it will likely impact either you or somebody that you know. And we're here to try to bring some light to this and give you some opportunities to understand what your options are now, and during, and how to get back on your feet. So the format's going to be, we're going to cover about 6 or 7 different main topics. After each topic, we'll go to a set of resources and a poll question and move through. So the first point is really attitude, and with that comes a lot of different emotions. If you haven't been laid off, if you haven't been furloughed, then you may not really be able to grasp what those of us that have been impacted in that way have had to go through. It's a standard set of emotions that many of us are going to feel, but a lot of us feel as if we're on an island. We're feeling things that others haven't. And to be quite honest, you're not alone. You'll go through various stages of grief and loss. You'll go through all the standard challenges that one will go through. It's really normal. The biggest challenge you're going to find through the process, certainly that I found when I had to go through it, is staying really positive. I was at one company for over 25 years, and I never saw it coming. But as your salary tends to go up, the longer you're at a company or the higher you ascend, it makes you more vulnerable. And if you're in an area of finance or other certain areas of a company, you could be considered, non-essential, or in other ways, you could just simply be seen as overhead because you're not directly tied to the lifeblood of the company and its revenue. That does make you more vulnerable. You go through the challenges of, should I have done something different earlier? And the reality is it was probably going to happen one way or the other. And the best thing you can do is not try to assess what you could have done different, and try not to look too much in the rearview mirror, but stay positive and look forward at how you can get back on your feet, what you can do to take the next step, and simply moving forward. And a lot of that is by doing things like this, learning what you can do, learning what your network opportunities are, connecting with others that have gone through something similar, and sharing your story. As simple as it sounds, going through that process is a pretty healthy process. And you'll be, I think many would be surprised to find out how many people from just your own graduating class have gone through the same thing in just the last 3 to 6 months. Over the past few weeks, probably a month and a half, I've been contacted by over 10 colleagues that I graduated with from class of 2014 that have all gone through some layer of challenge in this way, whether they were furloughed, laid off, or just simply let go with no opportunity to come back because their company closed their doors. So, the other big piece to think about here is it's a chance to really explore your interests. And for me personally, I didn't see myself ever having to go through this challenge, and it gave me the time to have some internal perspective and really assess what I wanted for the next number of years to maybe ride out my career. And what I found is I really wasn't as happy as I deserved to be, quite honestly, in my job. I've accomplished quite a bit of different things, and it took me down a different path than I expected. It created new doors it created new opportunities and different doors that opened. And from that, I ended up walking into a new position that leveraged all my experience, and one that I never would have seeked out otherwise. It simply turned into an opportunity. Last thing I'll mention on this is it's an opportunity to do things such as taking on an interim position, trying new things, perhaps consulting with some of your broadened knowledge, looking at potential franchising opportunities if you wanted to go into that, or business ownership, or some combination there of the above. It's simply an opportunity if you choose to see it that way. We've provided a few resources here, and there's different ways to go through coaching and different ways to managing job loss or the process of job search. But at the end of the day, it's an opportunity if you choose to view it that way, and it's a great opportunity if you want to walk into it that way. So now we go to networking, and for this point, I'll turn it over to Jane.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jane Evarian with the Russell Palmer Career Management Center at the Eli Broad College of Business. It's good to be here this evening with Rich and Nick, and I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe, as I think that's the most important thing that we can do right now. But of course, we are also in these unprecedented times, and as Rich mentioned, we are seeing growing unemployment. We are seeing certainly dips in the economy, and I think all of us are probably right to feel a little bit nervous. So I want to talk with you a little bit about networking, and I think networking can be seen as kind of this mysterious or nebulous sort of thing, because we talk about networking all the time, that networking is critically important to good career management. And before I kind of get into these two different forms of networking, both fast networking and slow and steady networking, I want to talk to you a little bit about these three very necessary practices that everyone needs for career advancement and for career management. And there are these three components to good career management. The first is valuation. And that really means that you have the ability to uncover, articulate, and leverage your value. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about resume design in a few minutes. So there's valuation. There's also alignment, which means aligning your skills, your talents, your experiences with jobs and companies of interest. And Rich talked a little bit about moments in time for him where he saw his experience as an opportunity to think about his interests and where he was headed. So that's a really important part of career management, is aligning your skills, your interests, your values, your talents toward the direction that you're moving. So there's valuation, and that's the ability to uncover, articulate, and leverage your value. There's alignment, and there's networking. You need those three components for career management. Networking is even more critical as you seek higher level roles. Hiring is risky, and the higher level the role, the more important it is for a company to have more certainty about the talent that they're bringing on board. But let me tell you this, no one advances in a vacuum. We all advance through some form of advocacy, endorsement, referral. And this is even more true as you advance in your career. So there are these two forms of networking. First, I want to introduce you to fast networking. Fast networking is seeking support and advocacy, just like the slide says. But it really ties in with when you apply for jobs in the conventional way, meaning that you go to LinkedIn, you go to Indeed, or some public job posting system, you see roles of interest, a job posting of interest, and you apply for that job. Now, most of us might think, oh my gosh, I've done good valuation, I've aligned my skills and experiences with the job and the company, I'm on my way to an interview. You can sometimes be the best on paper, so all of your marketing tools can be fantastic, but if you don't have advocacy from someone who's either working at that company or affiliated with that company, your chances of moving toward the interview are reduced, toward moving toward the interview pile, if you will. So this pictorial representation on the slide is really sharing with you that Let's say, for example, you apply for a job along with 499 other people. So there are these 500 applications or 500 resumes. First, what happens typically, and especially with larger companies, is something called the application tracking software kicks in. So the bot does the first review and is looking at your skills, your experiences, and is doing that alignment based on programming, essentially. And if you're lucky enough to align really well, and sometimes it's only 30% alignment. So if you align with about 30% of a job posting, I always say you got to apply. But first, remember that applicant tracking software, or ATS, is going to do the first round screening. And so let's say in the example that's illustrated here, we move from 500 resumes to 150. You still have a human who probably doesn't want to look at 150 resumes or even 30. So what's really helpful at that company is if someone who's working at that company comes to the hiring manager or the HR recruiter and says, you know, I've been talking to Rich. He's fantastic. He's also a Spartan. He's got great experience. I think we should put him on the interview pile. You're going to stand better chance of moving forward toward that interview, into that interview pile, if you've got some form of endorsement or advocacy. So my suggestion to folks is, when you see a job in the public job posting system, so in the public job market, make sure that one of your steps in the application process is to do some fast networking. And that means you go on LinkedIn, maybe you use Broad Connect, which is the internal professional networking platform. You find someone who works at the company of interest, you reach out to them. Hello, fellow Spartan, I've just applied for a role at XYZ company. I would love to talk with you. And you hit the connection request submit button. Will you always have someone respond to you? No, so you may have to try to do outreach with one or two other people at the company. You want to try to target an influencer or a decision maker. So that's fast networking. If you want to know a little bit more about fast networking, I can share some materials with participants a little bit later. But I wanted to introduce you to this idea of fast networking. Rich, can you advance the slide, please? Okay. So we're moving kind of into this zone of what I like to refer to as slow and steady networking. This is kind of a different process. But before we go through slow and steady networking, I want to show you something that if you've had some experience working in sales, this funnel might look pretty familiar to you. And it looks a lot like a sales funnel. So what you're doing with networking, fast and slow and steady networking, is you're identifying people who work at companies or in jobs of interest. I like to refer to them as prospects. So these are people that just are working at companies or in jobs of interest. What you're trying to do is, through your outreach, maybe it's a connection request via LinkedIn, you send them an email, maybe you even give them a phone call if you can find a phone number. You do some outreach, you ask for connection, and if they say yes, then you've converted them to a contact. Contacts are people that say, yes, I'll connect with you. And really what they're saying to you is, sure, let's chat. So what you're trying to do with the contact is you're trying to have a conversation, a 10 to 15 minute opportunity to learn more about them, more about the company they work at, and you're trying to see if you can get some support from them. So then your goal is to see if you can try to convert them into an advocate. Advocates are really special people. We're lucky if we get 3 to 5 of them in our professional work life, maybe a few more than that, but these are people who are really going to bat for you. So this idea of this funnel and conversion, what I don't want you to think is that this is a disingenuous or inauthentic way to think about building your network. It's not. This is really about you making professional friends. So Rich, can you advance the slide, please? Okay, so when we think about networking, I don't know. I've worked in this field for a really long time, and it's really easy to say to people, go do some networking or build your network. But I think for most of us, we don't know where to start. So this is just a short 6-step process for building your networking strategy. It starts with preparing your self-marketing tools, your LinkedIn profile, your resume, your value proposition, all the things that you need for self-marketing. Because what you're going to do next is you're going to make a list of companies, jobs, and people of interest. And honestly, that is often as easy as just going to Google and putting in the search field best companies to work for in the Detroit area, best companies to work for in Chicago. Working Mother magazine does a great annual list of best companies to work for, not just for women. Leading companies that are, companies that you may want to have on your list. Anyway, you need to make a list of companies, jobs of interest, people of interest. Step 3 is you want to build some sort of communication and outreach plan. Because if you've got 100 people that you've identified as prospects, you're going to need to keep track of this. You need some sort of communication and outreach plan. And you want to prepare for any conversations that you're going to have. In the career services world, we call this the informational interview. And then you have an informational interview or a conversation with someone, and you really try to test the professional pheromones. Do you like them? Do they like you? Is there a good vibe here? And if so, you want to make sure that you're working toward converting your contacts to supporters and advocates, because we do not advance alone. We don't advance in a vacuum. You need other people around you to help you. And Nick's going to talk a little bit more about networking and the details around that.
Thank you, Jane. So I want to start with what not to do. So it's really put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're asking the request of. If you're working with somebody or trying to form a relationship with somebody that you don't know, if you ask them to do something, are they actually going to do it? So common requests are like, can you review my resume? Will you introduce me to X person? And unfortunately, if they don't know you, they're not going to do it. And even if they are kind enough to do it, they probably don't know you well enough to do a good job to either review your resume and find out where your best skills are, or to provide a very positive introduction. So another well-meaning way that people go wrong is they ask, how can I help? The response is usually, thanks for offering, but I have no idea how. So usually your email gets archived, or they just thank you for it. And the truth is that most people don't have time to get you up to speed and don't have the bandwidth to really think about what you could do for them and don't really know you. So what I would suggest you do is ask people, what are the challenges in your business? You need to try and understand their environment. And then from there, you might be able to point them to resources, books, papers, articles, or you might be able to connect them with other people or groups that you're networked in with and provide resources that way. And that really ties you with the good information that you're providing as a valued resource to them. So a couple of options for networking. I would suggest looking around for joining a roundtable or starting one. They're usually industry specific or maybe occupation or career level, and we'll talk more about roundtables later. And another great idea is volunteering for a charity. So as you can see the resource links below, there's one there. You can do all kinds of work, and some of it is business related. And I want to share a few personal stories, and these people are advocates in Jane's terms. They are EMBA students and graduates. They've been so kind and so helpful in my networking. One person has introduced me to numerous people and really talked me up. And then I had a recent experience where I linked in with a former classmate who connected me with another EMBA graduate, who connected me with another EMBA graduate, who was the Chief Human Resources Officer for a company that I'm very interested in the job at. So it does work. So Todd, if you can bring up the networking poll, and I'll just finish up with a few concluding remarks for my section. So I would suggest that you plan your next month networking. List who you want to connect with, how to do this, and what you hope to get out of the meeting, and really think about how you can add value to your network. And if you're employed right now, I would suggest you do at least an hour every week. And that's something I really wish I'd done when I was in my last role. And if you're seeking an opportunity, I'd say one day every week or more to try and network. I don't know, how long do we want to leave the poll up for, Todd?
Give it just a couple more seconds, more are coming in. All right, we're going to stop that now.
All right, so it looks like a good amount of people are doing networking. That's great. I think, myself included, we need to step it up a little and really think, how it's going to benefit us in the future, because it really will. So LinkedIn, last week, Brenda Meller gave a presentation to the EMBA alumni. We're really hoping to be able to give you a link to that. So I won't spend too much time on this, but in essence, it's your online brand. It's about building up a strong network. And so a couple of tips that I would give you is, if you find a recruiter you're interested in, great, connect with them. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But also, if you look on the right-hand side of somebody's profile, you'll see people also viewed. And you may well find other recruiters that are either networked in with them or do similar jobs, and you can connect with those too. You really want to try and, you could try following the recruiter, you can connect with them. You really want to cement that relationship and do that somehow, maybe with asking for a quick introductory call. And if we're ever allowed out again, maybe asking to follow up with a coffee so that you can, go out and impress them in person. I've personally found InMail to be quite useful to connect with recruiters and hiring managers. I had applied for a position and didn't hear anything for a month. I sent the hiring manager, an InMail and got a response almost immediately. I got absolutely no response through the regular resume submission process. So I think that's worth giving a go. In general, please give and get endorsements. Don't be afraid to ask for them. And giving them is good, and it's okay to give more endorsements than you get. And I heard that joining groups for your target field is a good way to go. You post there to get noticed as a subject matter expert, and you make yourself visible to the community. And then that opens up conversations if people like your posts, and you might want to be able to network into the company that way. Following the companies is another good idea. It gives you information to talk about with connections or maybe at the interview. And LinkedIn also has a learning academy, which you can often access for free at your library. So you've got lynda.com and coursera.com, and I think we've got the links up on the next page. And the real question is, you guys are all smart EMBA graduates, why do this? But it's really about the continuous improvement, building new skills and having something else to discuss at the interview. And Todd, do you want to bring up the next poll? Awesome, thank you.
Leave this up here for just a couple more seconds. Okay, close it now.
I'm going to talk about recruiters in a second, but so it looks like there's a good amount of networking going on.
Yeah, this can have a tremendous impact in the way that you manage your time or simply getting back on your feet, going back to that poll question. So it's really a great place for you to put your time, and it can have a dramatic impact. And as Nick mentioned, LinkedIn Learning or lynda.com, but there's also Coursera, Udemy, Allison.com, and the volunteering aspect as well when you talk about where to spend your time. We could spend an entire hour on LinkedIn, and there's others that can probably do a more complete job than I think the three of us, but there's a lot of value to be contained there, and simply don't underestimate what you can do with that. and where do these other resources that are up there fit? As Nick mentioned, after as you start to go out and do other interviews, the opportunity to tell people where you spent your time, how you spent your time creatively versus, let's just say, surfing around on Netflix or whatnot, it gives you a great opportunity to help you stand out from the crowd during your interview process. So moving right along. Anything else you wanted to add to that, Nick or Jane?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Over to Jane.
All right. So resume design, it is a really important part of the job search. It's important that you keep your resume current. I think of this thing as this just sort of organic, ever-evolving document. If you, not too long ago, I wrote a book called Who Logic. You can find it on Amazon. You can easily access it off of BroadConnect, which is the professional networking platform that MSU uses. It's for alumni. So if you were to just Google BroadConnect, Michigan State University, it will bring you up to access to the platform. If you haven't already joined BroadConnect, I would urge you to do that, as we have put quite a few resources in for alumni around anything related to career management. You'll find chapters of my book in BroadConnect, including the resume design chapter and the networking chapter. So if you want a little more information about these topics that are incredibly important, feel free to go to BroadConnect. And then certainly if you have any challenges finding that material, send me an email. My email address is really easy. It's my last name, Evarian@msu.edu. But I do want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about resume design. The other thing I want to mention is we will do a resume design workshop sometime mid-June, I think June 18th, but we're solidifying some of those details. So as soon as we know, we'll make sure that you know. But a couple of things about resume, because we have so many topics to cover over the next few minutes. I think the first thing and the best thing to remember is that resumes are incredibly subjective. Over almost 25 years working in this field, I can't tell you the number of times individuals have come to me and said, well, Nick told me to write it one way, and Rich told me to write it something in a very different way. So, you know, we could have 20 different hiring managers in front of us or decision makers in front of us for one resume, and they would have differing things to say about style, format, content. But I can tell you that one thing is for certain and is absolutely true about every resume. They need to be value-centered and evidence-based. Because if we ask ourselves one of the most simplistic questions we can ask, which is, why do companies exist? So if I were to ask Nick and Rich that question, you might say a lot of different things. But really what it comes down to is companies exist to make money. And they do that by creating value. You and I are never going to buy their products and services unless we see value in those products or services. So we know that's the language and practice used by companies. They're using the very same practices. Even their bot that's doing the first screen of your resume is using valuation and alignment. They're trying to figure out and trying to predict the value that you can add based on understanding the value you've added in the past. So Who Logic is really just this assessment framework. And what it does is it helps you take a look at your experiences from a very, very simple, agile, nimble framework. And the idea is, what did you do? How did you do it? And what outcomes did you produce? And really, for EMBAs, I really emphasize more of the what and the outcome, unless you have differentiating hows that you really want to leverage. It's really what tasks or projects or initiatives, you know, were you a part of or have you been a part of, and what outcomes have you produced that really have helped the company make money, create value. So it's a very value-centered, evidence-based experience when you're writing your resume. Rich and Nick and I were talking about resume design the last time we spoke, and one of the things that I'm not a fan of is spending lots and lots of money having somebody do this for you. Because my experience has said to me that if you're having someone else do the assessment and determine the outcomes and the value that you've added in the past, how are you going to be able to articulate and leverage that when you're pitching, when you're networking, when you're interviewing? You have to do the deep assessment on your experiences. What did you do? How did you do the work? What outcomes did you produce? The other thing that's incredibly important, particularly in business, is that measurement matters, and that's really connected to outcomes. When you're writing what I call value points, I don't call them bullet points. When you're writing value points, it's really important for you to be thinking about numeric values. Percentages, numeric values that can speak to increases, decreases, anything that helps relay the value you added at the company. The other thing, probably one of the biggest challenges I see that folks have is sometimes they think about a resume as kind of like a job description, and they will list everything. So you might have somebody working in a job for 5 years and they've got 20 bullet points. You cannot do that. You have about 5 to 15 seconds to get somebody's attention. Not only do you need to do an outcome-based assessment on your experiences, you need to rank order and prioritize your achievements and your accomplishments. What are you really selling here? Because you're the seller and the company is the buyer. So you need to be very careful and use a lot of brevity in terms of the number of value points that you create for each experience. This is not everything in the kitchen sink. You need to assess, you need to rank and prioritize, and you need to be outcome focused. So measurement matters here. The other thing that I think can be really challenging, and it comes back to alignment. You do have to tweak your resume quite a bit. You need to carefully take a look at the job description, and you need to ask yourself, when you look at the skills and qualifications, how many of these skills and qualifications do I meet? And am I articulating them and leveraging them on my resume? It's really important. If you're using one generic resume and you're applying to multiple jobs, you may not be doing the kind of alignment that you really need to do to make sure that you're aligning your skills and experiences with the job description. I call it the matchmaking game, and you have to spend time doing it. It's really important. So Nick, if you can, or Rich, can you advance to the next slide? There are a couple of resources that we're including here, thank you, Nick, that actually help you do some of that alignment, where you can upload a job description and upload your resume, and the system will do the alignment. It's a little bit like an application tracking software tool, but it's going to help you determine whether or not you're aligning as much as you possibly can with the job description. This is all incredibly important. I wish I could say I think resumes are the most important thing that you can do, that they're really the way you get a job. They're not. They're really a talking tool. They're helping you assess and refine how you're marketing your experiences. So use brevity, use economy, use some of these tools that are available to you, and check out some of my materials on Road Connect. And also, I think I'll be seeing you mid-June. I hope so anyway. Todd, if you can pull up the poll, that would be fantastic.
We'll give it just a couple more seconds here.
Well, Jane, I think you're going to have a great attendee count.
Well, I would say, I think like most of us, it's a continuous process. This thing stays with us throughout our professional life, and it's just a continuous experience, resume design. So you're not alone. We're all working on our resumes regularly, or we should be. But I'll hold for now, and I'll pass things along to Nick to talk a little bit about recruiters.
Okay, thanks, Jane. So if you missed it, Rich Kolpaski, who's an executive recruiter, did a great talk, I think last week or the week before, and we do actually have a link to that talk in the resources so you can review it. But Rich was too nice to say this, but I'll say it for you. And it's a lesson I had to learn, is that recruiters are not there to find you a job. They're paid by the client to find that specific talent. Therefore, you need to know what your value is and why they should remember you. And I think this relates back to one of Jane's points in the resume, is that they are there to de-risk the hiring process. So the question is, how do you become a low-risk prospect? What's important to them? Probably the first thing you need to know is you need to know who you're dealing with. So there's 3 types of recruiters, and that determines their approach to you and your prospects, essentially. So the first type is contract recruiters, and they act essentially as an employee of the firm, and you may as well consider them as an employee of the firm in terms of how that relationship is for you. The second is retained, and they are paid to start a search, and they often enjoy a really close relationship with the client. So their duty very clearly is with pleasing that client and maintaining that relationship. So they have a long process to find talent. I think Rich mentioned that he might take 2 to 3 months and interview his candidates 3 times, which is great practice for you. And you also get a very good idea from them about what exactly the client wants, so that when you have the interview with the client, you can really shine. And the third type is contingent, and they get paid when they place the candidate. One of the hallmarks is in the conversation when they call you up is they will not tell you the name of the company because they don't want you applying directly. So we've got 3 questions I would suggest you ask the recruiter to determine, their relationship and, whether they're going to be a positive influence. And if you ask these questions and they get offended, they probably don't have that much of a relationship or be very helpful to you in the process. So the first question is, are you retained on this search? The second one is, how many searches have you done for this client? And the third one is, what's your relationship with the hiring manager? And I think really, if you can get answers to those, you're really going to understand, how much influence they have with the client. Are they a trusted advisor? So when you actually go and talk to the client, are you going to have a leg up? But in general, with recruiters, I would suggest you spend less than 20% of your time working with them. I think maybe 60% networking, 20% direct applications, but I'm not the expert. I'm going to defer to Jane on those percentages if she thinks differently. And another point would be, if you want to get a recruiter's attention, you really need to get referred by the right person. So, you're busy people. Who do you pay attention to? People you trust, people you know. So you really want to get a referral, an introduction from your network if you can. I've heard that recruiters are noticing pro forma cover letters and resume templates. If you use those, you may not stand out. Another point is recruiters are generally looking for industry experience and then looking for relevant past experience. They are not good for a career change because you become a risk. Similarly, if you're applying for a position where it's a step down, maybe in title, responsibility, or compensation, the fear is that when the market picks up, and we all hope it will, right, that you will jump and that will affect their relationship with the client. So that's especially true for retained recruiters. Now, right now, you can imagine that recruiters are talking to a lot of job seekers. So the way that you communicate with them is really, really important. And you need to be very specific with what you're looking for. And, going to a recruiter and being very general really doesn't help you. So if you say, hi, Nick, I'm actively looking for my next opportunity. If you hear of anything that fits my background, please keep me in mind. And I know that it's tempting to take that approach because you don't want to narrow your options, because you don't want to cancel yourself out from anything that might be there. But the problem is they just don't remember who you are. If you said something more like, hey, I'm actively looking for a CIO role in a privately held business, I would also consider a director of IT role overseeing multiple lines of business or locations. You become a lot more memorable. So if they ask you what kind of roles you're interested in hearing about, once again, you've got that temptation to really open yourself up for any opportunity possible because you need a job. Saying something like, I'm open for anything. I've managed people and I can sell, versus putting it in a different way, saying something like, some of my key strengths are effectively managing others and software development. And because of this, I'm focusing on a technology director level where I can spend some of my time using my business skills and manage a development team and really have fun that way. Another question that a lot of recruiters ask are, what locations are you open to? So once again, you've got the general response, which would be, oh, anywhere. I'm geographically mobile, open to office nationwide, versus something that, once again, is more specific and memorable, but doesn't necessarily cancel you out. So something like, my wife and I are empty nesters, we're open to relocation. I'd love to stay here, but if we did relocate, I'd love to go to these 3 areas. So it's really about being specific and helping the recruiters remember you. One of the questions I've asked them at the end of the conversation is, how can I help you? What challenges are you facing? Can I refer candidates to you? What kind of candidates are you looking for? Will they have a specific background? And quite honestly, I'm surprised to hear that I'm usually the first person to ask that, though hopefully I won't be anymore. But you need to look at this as a relationship with a recruiter as a two-way thing, right? So you want to be a friend. If you can refer them candidates or even job opportunities for them to act as a client for a company, you become front of mind, and that really keeps you in the race for other positions. And that also means that then they feel goodwill to you, and it opens up more than half of their network who are not actually about recruiting clients, and they can network in for you. So, Todd, if you can bring up the poll, please.
Give that just a few more seconds here.
Oh, that's awesome. Great. All right, I'm going to hand over to Rich, and he can tell you how to perform a successful negotiation.
Before we leave that, one thing I want to add to just the answers from the poll question. A lot of people said no, they weren't really ready to articulate all their differentiators. As Jane mentioned, writing your own resume or at least having the lion's share or the stake in that will very clearly help you in articulating your benefits, knowing what your quantifiable differences are with others, and where you can contribute value to any organization. So a lot of these things, as you're starting to see that we've talked about today, they either build off of one another or they're directly linked. So, that's just another example. One of the things I wanted to talk about here is something that many of us have thought about maybe or learned, or if you're in this situation, I can tell you that most people don't negotiate a severance. If you're with an organization and you're let go, laid off, whatever the situation might be, the majority of the people don't negotiate. They simply accept it and move on and feel grateful for the severance that they've been provided. I'm not saying you shouldn't be grateful, but I am letting you know that you have to really think deeply about why it's being offered to you. And it's not simply for your benefit. Most companies are truly offering that severance to make sure that you go away quietly. I know that's a rather awkward way to put it, but it's quite true. The severance is really there to make sure that you are going to sign the severance letter and not follow legal action afterwards, that you're not going to contest anything, that you're simply going to move on. And in most cases, I found that that's what people simply do. But in reality, what can you do? Once you understand why the severance is offered, the next question is, well, It sounds really great in a negotiation that I would negotiate for more, but I'm afraid that if I do negotiate, I'll lose the severance that's offered. Once again, realize why they've offered you the severance. By negotiating, it's not, let me restate that, in about 98% of the cases, it's not going to reduce or eliminate your severance that's being offered. I've spoken with a number of labor attorneys on this, and they're all of similar mind share. It's really in your best interest to try to negotiate it, because the company doesn't want you to, again, seek legal action afterwards. They don't want you to communicate to others that, or badmouth the company. They don't want you to communicate with others that may be in the same position in the company, that you're going to seek legal action, because it would only encourage them to do the same. So knowing that that's the carrot that's in your side, or the piece that's on your side in this, what can you negotiate for, and what can you reasonably expect? Some of the standard things that I've heard of people negotiating for is a continuation of medical benefits. If you're going to be laid off and having to go on COBRA, it's extremely expensive. So you can ask for a continuation of your existing medical benefits, or simply the compensation added to your severance offer to cover that for 3 to 6 months, or whatever you decide to negotiate for. In some cases, depending on your situation, COBRA can be $1,000, $1,200, $1,600 a month. Many people, like myself, didn't really realize just how expensive that could be, and that's certainly something that you can negotiate for. And I found that many companies, in talking to others, have given on that front. You can certainly ask for more compensation, but there needs to be some reasoning as to why. A lot of companies will have a formula which they use to calculate the amount of severance that they provide. One such way is asking or calculating it based off of number of years served or position in the company. And you can push back on that once you understand the equation. If they offer, one company might offer a half a week of severance for the number of years you've been there. Some might offer a certain amount for each week or each year that you've been there, and then a certain larger amount after 15 years, or after 20 years, or after 10. You can play with that equation, but come up with a reasonable amount and why you're going to ask for something different for a different amount. Many companies that I've heard of offer 2 weeks severance for each year that you've been employed. So you can, once you know the equation, you can adjust the numbers, but make sure that your ask is reasonable. Another thing that can be negotiated for is outplacement services. Many companies don't offer that, and I don't think it's for lack of wanting to offer it. Many companies just don't even realize the benefit that it can provide both the company as well as the employee. And we'll come to outplacement services in just a minute. The other thing that a lot of companies will offer is if you've got stock options in a company that haven't fully vested. A lot of companies will, if you ask, offer or accept to accelerate the vesting so that those shares don't go unvested and you simply lose those amounts. You know, there's a lot of other things you can negotiate for as well. Those are just some of the standard things that I know that have been good points of interest for people. But the reality is, really think about your situation, what's going to be of most value to you, and think about what you're giving up or what you're losing by being laid off. Maybe you're losing a company car. You may not be able to keep the company car, but you may be able to say, I have a company car today. I would need another $300 for the next 6 months, $300 a month to support leasing that vehicle or covering my vehicle costs that I didn't think I was going to have to cover at that point. Last thing that I'll mention is on the negotiation specifically is I found it quite valuable, and others have too, to negotiate for something you don't think you're going to get. A lot of times, everybody's going to want to walk away from a negotiation feeling victorious. And if you simply push for all the things you want, realize, and those are the only things you push for, you're not likely to get them all. So I think many times it's valuable to push for 1 or 2 things that you're probably not going to get, and give that as something you're willing to give ground on during the negotiation. This way, it lets everybody walk away from the situation feeling like they were slightly victorious. And with that, you know, there's a lot of options and all of that. You can seek legal action. I do encourage, if you're put in this position, to reach out to a labor attorney to just understand your options, and they can go through a lot of the negotiation options with you as well. The thing I want to leave everybody with on this is you're not on an island. You don't have to accept what they put out there. They are expecting you to negotiate. And if you don't, they're simply going to walk away from it and feeling completely victorious. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but realize you're not going to lose your severance by asking for more or negotiating. Here's a few resources with which you can use to learn a little bit more about the process, questions you can raise during that process, and other tools that may help you through building a proper strategy there. Todd, could you put up the poll?
If I can just add while we're on the poll, the second link is to the Harvard program on negotiation. And if you're interested in this area, they have a ton of great and free resources there.
Give this just a couple more seconds.
That's very good. I'm glad a lot of people are ready for that. You know, if it does happen to you and you're called into the HR room and you're not necessarily ready, it really is your opportunity to really do something there for yourself. You don't know how long this process is going to last, specifically during this COVID situation, and this severance that you negotiate can really help you through this time. You know, when you're called into a room and you're going through the process, the last thing you might think about is negotiating. One standard thing I'd like to leave everybody with here is you really shouldn't sign anything in that HR moment. They're not expecting you to. They may ask for it. I think they'd be shocked if you did. You should really take a moment, read through all the paperwork effectively. And as you do that, you want to put your negotiation terms in writing. Don't leave it to the HR or the person that you're dealing with to properly represent you in that regard. And so I think you should put it in writing and then follow up with a phone call with the appropriate person that you want to negotiate with. And that doesn't mean HR. I think you should reach out to your hiring manager, whoever you were reporting to, and working through it that way. It's important to have it in writing so that they know what your requests are, and that gives you the chance to negotiate for each one on the phone at that moment. One of the last things that we wanted to talk about here was outplacement services and outplacement assistance. I mentioned that you can negotiate for that, and you know, I certainly didn't know what it was before, and it was something that I learned a lot about afterwards, and it provided a lot of value to me personally. I think for many it can be a great resource. For others it might not offer quite as much value. But what is outplacement assistance? How do you get it? And what's really offered, or what value might it play? In most cases, it'll provide you with a personal career coach that you can talk with and talk about the process with. It'll provide a resume writing coach or resume writing tools and resources, cover letter writing, a full networking capability and opportunity by putting you in touch with others, as well as linking you to other networking groups so that you can share your experience, share what you're looking for, and try to work forward in that regard. One of the things that I really found value was I hadn't interviewed in quite a while. It was really good to go through some interview prep, and your career coach is really there to help you with that as well. And the other thing that you can look for there is job fairs. They can link you to job fairs that are out there, as well as the single biggest thing that I found value on was their resource library that they provided. I go back to almost anything we talked about here. There was a resource out there for it. If you want to explore your options, or maybe this period of COVID is going to last longer and it may be challenging for you to find that next opportunity, because the higher you are in an organization, simply the longer it's going to take to land in the right spot for you, or maybe at the right salary point that you want to hit. Having those resources was fabulous, because it goes through such things as how to start your own business, how to maybe investigate franchising opportunities, how to go through and put a networking brief together so that you can feel successful when you do negotiate those types of challenges. And it's simply provided a lot of value with which you can use to accelerate your own process or use your time most effectively when you're trying to find that next opportunity. We talked about LinkedIn Learning. We talked about all of that stuff. The service that I used offered something very similar to LinkedIn Learning as well, and offered a lot of free courseware and things that could be used. So now, what does it cost? For the large ones that are used by the automotive companies, like Right Management and others, to be quite honest, your employer is the one that has to provide it. So your employer coming out and providing that, which many do and many don't. What you can do during your negotiation is negotiate for that. And so the way that many have chosen to do it is to sell their company on why it should be valuable. And the way that it's valuable to the company is if an employee is laid off and then you're providing them with the ability to get back on their feet, or provide resume writing or things of that nature, it's going to have them walking away with a better taste in their mouth and a better ability to not speak poorly of the company afterwards. That's one. If you're provided with the opportunity to have resume writing, or the ability to go through interview prep, or linked into job fairs or other networking keys, it will also provide you the opportunity to perhaps get off unemployment faster, with which your company is paying into. There's a variety of ways that you can sell that to your company. But I was rather surprised when talking to a number of people that had no idea what outplacement assistance was, and their companies had no idea. So realize it can be a valuable resource. And it's not just by dealing with the coach, it's provided by really leveraging all the resources that are available through that. Could we place the poll up there, Nick? Or Todd, excuse me. Very interesting. Nick, would you like to make any comments on this?
Sure, yeah. So in part of the follow-up link, we'll try and get you guys connected. We'll reach out and find out how big a roundtable we can form, and maybe get some ideas, follow-up ideas from the participants on what form they would like the roundtable to take and how often they would like to meet, and so on. So it could be something that happens in the day, it could be happening in the evening, it might be once a month, it might be twice a month. So we'll send something out and get some information back from those who are interested, and go from there and see what we can form.
In closing, I just want to thank all the presenters that were, I want to thank Nick and Jane for their preparation and the things that they put forth, and the time that was put into putting the resources together. It's a valuable set of resources. And really, one of the things that I don't know that everybody truly thinks about as they're going through and earning their MBA. You know, it is an education. It does provide you with a great depth of knowledge and a many broad range of topics. But earning an MBA is more than just the education. Earning an MBA and part of what you're paying for in your investment of time, money, energy is really the network that it can provide. And you know, I'm really proud to be part of the EMBA alumni group, and I share that time with Nick as well and others. You know, that networking pool is part of what you pay for, and the events that we have, the networking things. I know COVID has put a little bit of a wrench in that, but leveraging that crowd is extremely valuable, and not just networking in person, although that's extremely valuable. You know, reach out to the people that are in your network, not just on the board, but through LinkedIn, all your other opportunities to connect with with various years of graduation through the MBA process. That network is part of the value that Michigan State provides through earning your MBA there. Nick, any closing remarks from you?
I think you've hit the nail on the head perfectly. I mean, the value now is that network. What can it do for your career? What can you do to help other people? There's a tremendous amount of satisfaction to be gained from helping out other people and seeing your friends and your classmates succeed and thrive, prosper.
Jane, anything you wanted to add in closing?
If you haven't joined Broad Connect yet, I would encourage folks to do that. It's a great platform. We just launched it last August. You'll find thousands of MSU and Broad alumni in the system, and it's a much warmer environment than LinkedIn. Not to say that LinkedIn isn't, but Broad Connect, if you've created a profile or if you've been in, you can see that people actually list how it is they can help, whether it's resume reviews, networking, you know, helping out with work-life balance, all kinds of advice and tips and mentoring opportunities and mentorship opportunities. So please join Broad Connect if you haven't already.
That's it. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time. I know we went a little bit long. I truly appreciate it.
So we do have a couple questions if you guys want to answer those. Just real quick, a good segue. When networking, how do you come across not desperate?
One thing I can add to that is I didn't know where to start, and I felt I was going to come off exactly that way. I created a networking brief, and if you're not familiar with what that is, you can simply do a Google search and pull one down, and it's really a series of questions which helps you think about the types of ways that you can start, engage with, and provide value within the conversations, as Nick put it. And if you go into one of those, more providing value than asking for favors or looking for help, the help will be there for you anyway. But look for ways to provide value and insert value into those. I think that's the best way to work in that opportunity.
Yeah, and if I can add, it's really about being curious. Understand that your value matters. That's the other thing. I mean, I know that there are times when we can feel really down and professionally really vulnerable and insecure, but your value matters, and keep that at the forefront of your mind, along with curiosity. Really, networking is about being curious. It's about taking your growth mindset and wanting to learn and build relationships with people who are, you know, doing work that you're really interested in. And I think it's networking. If you stop thinking about, I need a job, I need a job, I need a job, and really think about, I want to make friends. I'm curious. I want to know what projects this person has worked on in the past that have been meaningful to them. I want to understand how they've added value.
Maybe I want to ask questions like, what are the 3 things you'd work on if you had the time and resources? And then you begin to learn what they care about, and you use that place of empathy and caring and compassion to kind of build that relationship, especially when the vibe feels good. They're kind to you, they're supportive, and know this, you will pay it forward. We all pay it forward. Networking is really about paying it forward, being curious, and remembering that your value matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we're afraid to send out a LinkedIn message or an email to reach out to somebody we know or we don't know, put yourself in their shoes. If you read it in their shoes, would you be offended by this message? You know, your worst fears are nowhere near, you know, reality. There are people who are innately good. They want to help other people. And if you're curious and reasonable and looking to add value, or at least, you know, ask a question so you can understand something. People want to talk about themselves. They love talking about themselves, and you know, you'll pique their interest. It's when you start asking for things and just looking at it as a transactional thing, and really not looking at how you can add value or displaying that curiosity. That's when you're going to fall down. So if you read your message and you can't see, you know, you wouldn't be offended by it, send it off. You know, the worst that will happen is they won't respond, right? So.
Okay, perfect. Another question here. When you find yourself on the wrong end of employment, how do you stay positive and focused?
I would say, if I can jump in, really think about planning your time. So time management is crucial. What I found very useful in a job and, you know, while seeking employment is write down a list of things that you're going to do tomorrow. Do it the night before. So when I was working, you know, I would do it before I left the office, and it was kind of my data dump, so I wouldn't have it spinning around in my head for the next day. And I could go home and not think about the stuff that I had to do tomorrow because it was all written down. But it also, when you are seeking an opportunity, it means that you wake up with a purpose, right? Your day is planned out, and also know within the, you know, be realistic with yourself, and also know yourself. I'm most creative in the morning. I'm most excited about doing things in the morning. When it comes to about 2 or 3 o'clock, I'm tired. Right? I've got that slump. I'm not going to advertise for energy drinks. But so what do I do then? I do my kind of boring admin work. You know, if I've got to plug something in a spreadsheet or update, you know, who I've spoken to, that's a great time for me to do it. And also figure out what you have to do in the day and what is going to advance your search and what you'd like to do, and be very careful about differentiating the two. So, you know, things that add value versus things you like doing might be mutually inclusive, but they also might be 2 different things. The things that we love doing don't always get us to where we want to be. And so if you look at your list, say after lunch, you know, I'm coming down to that slump and I realize I've got things that my number 1 priorities that I haven't done, I don't feel tired anymore. I'm like, how am I going to get these done before I can stop working for the day? So I better get on with it. Likewise, if you do everything, you can knock off early, right? Because you're your own boss. And if you're happy with that, and that's the beauty of seeking employment.
The one thing I'd like to add to that is a friend gave me some great advice who'd gone through that experience before me. And I found that a lot of people had challenges there, which is, he told me, get up every day, go take your shower, follow your morning routine. And I got to be honest, I didn't take any time off. Some people do. That's another strategy. But getting up and basically finding the next opportunity as a job will also help me stay positive. It's challenging at times because it can be a roller coaster. But at the end of the day, this is a time to also network. And what Jane mentioned, what the heck does networking mean? It means a lot of different things to different people. But in COVID throws a little bit of a wrench in this suggestion, but you know, hopefully after June 12th, we can do this again. Go out and have coffee, go to Starbucks, meet other people at Starbucks, or I'm not trying to advertise for them, but go out and have coffee with your friends and connect with people and make that part of your daily routine. I sort of went out and I networked with a lot of people at least 2-3 times outside of my normal environment at home. And it's easy to get negative if you just stay home and just do those standard things and keep pushing. It's also really easy to get negative if you just start watching Netflix all day, I guess. But at the end of the day, if you do things like LinkedIn Learning and know that you're contributing to your own self-worth through the process, or get connected to charities and doing some volunteer work, not only does it give you something great to talk about in your interview of how you can differentiate yourself, but what you did credible with your time, it helps keep that positive mantra moving.
Great, thank you for that. And one final question, this one's kind of loaded. So what are typical severance negotiation methods, and why would a company be tempted to negotiate severance?
You know, on the first part, that's a challenge. That's going to be company to company. So I can't say what's really typical. But the reason they want to negotiate with you, that negotiation or that severance is really there to get you to sign the severance agreement. And when you read it, you'll see things like you give up all rights to follow on legal action. You give up the right to be able to speak negatively about the company. Not that you're going to want to necessarily anyway, but realize what's there. That severance agreement is really there for the company. It's not there to make you feel better about the situation, even though that's how it's probably going to be presented. I shouldn't say that unilaterally, but that's 95% of the situations. When Jane, Nick, and I were talking, I think we were all pretty much on the same page with this. It's really there to support the company's need for you to move on, and to really, they wouldn't offer the amount of money that they are, or the severance that they are, if it didn't behoove them to do so. Because remember what Jane said in the beginning. Jane brought up this point very specifically. What is the company's #1 reason for being? And it's to earn revenue. And this is another way. They wouldn't offer you money to ding into that income or that revenue if it didn't have value to them. That is the reason that they will negotiate. They want that time to be over quickly. They don't want to worry about any litigation. It's going to be far more costly for them to litigate or have it drag on than it is for you to sign it and walk away. And that is your trump card. That is the power that's in your hand.
Yeah, I would agree completely with Rich. I mean, you're not powerless by any means in the situation, and the company's reputation is exceedingly important to them. And we all know when we have one bad experience, we tell 10 people. When we have a good experience, we unfortunately only go and tell 1 or 2. This is their opportunity to make you happy, or at least as happy as they possibly can given the circumstances. And companies are really afraid of litigation. There are a lot of lawyers out there who will take cases, whether they are valid or not. And, you know, they can spend a lot of money to be proved right, or much less money to, you know, give you what you need. And quite honestly, like Rich said, the hassle, the time, the stress for them, it's really not worth it. And the chances are when you're sitting across the table from somebody who's doing the negotiation, they feel bad, and they want to make you feel better about it. I know that you are hurting and shocked and in pain, but they also feel bad. So if you can give them an opportunity to make them feel good about themselves, they're probably going to take it. It's human nature.
The last thing I'll add to that, it's a very good point, Nick. You talk about sitting at the table and negotiating with them. Please understand that during that meeting with HR, you shouldn't sign anything, and it's not necessarily the best time to negotiate. It's a time for you to pick up the pieces of paperwork that they've provided, go home and truly digest them, read them, understand what's there, and make sure that you agree with it. Another good thing to negotiate for, and I didn't mention this, but a lot of times they'll ask you to sign a non-compete. The only way for you to get your next position is to get rid of that non-compete, and it's a great opportunity to do so. But when Nick talks about sitting across from the person, specifically during this situation, you might not have that opportunity. But when we do say sitting across from the table, I can strongly suggest that you do not try to negotiate in that first meeting, because you're probably not going to be as prepared as you want to be. And typically you're given either 23 or I think it's 48 days to sign that severance. It depends on if it was a layoff or if it was a workforce reduction, which the companies are bound to certain legalities based on which format it takes. So realize you have at least 23 days to sign that and get it back to them. That means you have 23 days with which to negotiate and to figure out and which fee, how you want to stand on your own 2 feet, what you want to negotiate for, and what simply has the most value for yourself.
No, that's great. And we had another comment from one of our attendees that just simply said the severance agreement protects the company from risk and would help them save money. So that's a good solid point as well. So I just want to take this time. I know we've ran over considerably, and for everyone that hung out, we appreciate you joining us today. So with that, I want to thank our panel, Rich, Jane, Nick, for taking the time to offer this insight. To become an expert in these areas is sometimes unfortunate because sometimes you have to go through that. So for sharing your experiences and really offering your resources and support is very helpful. I also want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We appreciate your time and hope you found it valuable. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. A question that I received pretty much throughout this entire thing is if you would receive the resources. You will receive a follow-up email if you registered to this within 24 to 48 hours with a link to the recording. We can also share the slide deck with the links that were referenced, so that if you guys missed that, you can have that as well. So on behalf of the Michigan State University EMBA Alumni Association, I just want to thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.